a Python package called PyApache Atlas, which I will not to promote too much here, but I will definitely drop a link in the chat. This is a wrapper for the underlying REST APIs that gets you kind of started faster with Azure Purview when you move beyond the built-in tools, and we'll talk about that as we move along. But I just want to emphasize that I've got a lot of expertise in Azure Purview, and I'm really excited to talk to you all about this and really have the opportunity to share with all this information. So that's me. Nicole, do you want me to let Chris introduce himself and then we jump into the presentations? Okay, Chris, go for it.
I'll come back on camera. Hello, everybody. Chris Fleming, and like Will, I am a cloud solution architect. Really looking forward to the discussion today when Nicole and Paul and I were talking about this topic of Purview. I work with Purview a lot, but there's one person that I go to for questions on Purview, and that's Will. Tremendous amount of knowledge that Will has been involved with the project early on, and I've learned a lot from Will. And the best part, Will is Wisconsin based. So
I forgot to mention that, Chris. Yeah, thanks. I forgot where I lived, right? But I'm in Kenosha. I'm in Kenosha, so I'm far away from you guys. I did a consulting engagement up in Appleton one time, and it is far. Holy crud, you guys are far north. Oh my gosh, it was a long.
Only when there's construction
drive.
on. Yeah. Only when there's Kenosha construction.
Nice. So awesome. Thanks for that, Chris. Okay, so I'm gonna steal the ball here. I'm going to share my screen here. I'm also on Windows 11, but I just got upgraded yesterday or this morning technically. So I don't have an opinion on it, a significant opinion on it right now. So other than it works just as well as Windows 10, and it seems to be a pretty good tool. So what I heard from the introductions was that we have a lot of DBAs. There's an application developer, business intelligence folks here. So I'm going to do the high level. Just we're not going to go through all these slides. We're going to get right into the product as fast as possible. But I just wanted to give a kind of a context, since it sounds like Purview is a new topic. Some folks have heard a little bit about it, but I want to make sure we are fully aware. So very briefly, Azure Purview. Our byline for it is unify data governance to maximize the business value of data. That doesn't mean anything to most people, so we're going to break it down a little bit further. Essentially, what Microsoft is approaching here is that we are recognizing that as the world produces more and more data, the more and more difficult it is to keep your hands around it, right? A DBA used to have the opportunity to be like, yeah, this is my SQL server, this is my Teradata server, and it's here. This is my world. But now it's everywhere. Now it's in the data lakes. It's in the Delta Lake if you're using Databricks. It's on AWS. It's on Azure. It's on GCP. It's everywhere and anywhere. So as a result, Microsoft's strategy has been to embrace it all, right? We're a platform company, right? If I look at the back of my badge, our corporate logo or our corporate mission is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. See, I've got my badge right here. I can remember it. And so we're all about empowering. We're not necessarily about locking you in. So we give that solution through Azure Purview to say, wherever your data is, we want you to be able to get a hands around it, to understand what's inside of it, where it's located, what's the important attributes about that metadata about your data in these vast ecosystems. So yep, if you have a chief data officer, you must be a massive company. I don't know if Microsoft even has a chief data officer, but we're targeting towards you all who want to keep track of this information, and especially around the ideas of I again have it everywhere, and I need to know what's inside that data. Is it sensitive information? Is it PII, PHI, right? What's out there, and how can I ensure that it is eventually locked down as well and secured? So I'm just going to skip past some of this, right? Again, we are just talking about we want to make sure that everyone is kind of keeping track of all this information out here. And I think we're just going to stop the slides at this point, except for this slide. This is a nice slide here where we actually have information on a little bit of the concepts behind Purview. So Azure Purview, from a business user's perspective, it's a web interface. That's all they really care about. It's going to be a data catalog that lets you search for assets, search for tables, columns, databases, file names potentially that are located somewhere in your data estate, your ecosystem of data. And awesome, we will have, again, for business users, this web UI. Under the hood, though, as soon as you start moving into more of these, like I'm a business intelligence administrator, I'm a DBA, you might be responsible for more of this, right? You might be contributing into that Purview metadata information. And so that's where we have these things like, data producers and consumers. We can hook into, gosh, I'm trying to think of the number off the top of my head, at least, 10 or it's like 20 or 40 different built-in data sources we can connect into that allows us to grab that metadata out in a secure way and then make it available to those business users and to the administrators to enhance even further. So there's something like, again, 20 to 40 different connectors that we have, and that populates this thing called the data catalog. And so again, that's where business users will go. They'll try to find stuff. They'll potentially look at things like the lineage of assets as well. Like, hey, how is this table generated? Well, I can see that through Azure Purview. In addition, again, less for the business users, more for those administrators, we have these data insights. And so that's like my favorite example that I don't have access to anymore, but it was pretty neat, is that let's say you are working on a multi-cloud strategy or multi-cloud plus on-prem, and you suddenly see that you have a regular system to scan your AWS buckets or your Azure data lake. And on that period when you've scanned this data lake, you've reached out to that data lake and you have identified all the files and things like that are out there. Suddenly you start seeing in this data insights section a bunch of confidential information. And it literally says this is confidential. This is or social security numbers and credit card numbers. Yeah, in data insights, we'll see there'll be a little spike that says, hey, did you know that you suddenly got 50 new files or 50 new tables with PII in there and credit card information in there? Then a data governance officer or a person who has been put in charge of handling security at your company can say, that doesn't seem right. I feel like having so many PII credit card information just suddenly appear in our data lake, that's a bad thing. So I will go and investigate, right? We're giving these opportunities for those data insights or data governance folks to take action, right? When they historically couldn't, because they just don't know that the files exist out there, all right? They don't know what people are doing without this regular scanning of the ecosystem that they operate on. And then there's this data map, which is, again, this larger scale of connecting all these on-prem sources and cloud sources and organizing them. We'll see that here in just a moment when I get all these slides finally, and we go to this broader picture of, hey, how do I organize all these data sources? And how do I ensure that individuals who are allowed to view metadata about this source have permission to do so, and anyone else doesn't, right? If I only want to say, the finance database, while we don't contain any actual data inside of Azure Purview, there's no way for you to actually go through Purview and see the data, right, directly, right? Purview doesn't give you a window into the data, but it does give you metadata, right? So like the name of the columns, the linkage between tables and things like that, to the server and things like that, the location of the file in your data lake potentially. It has this metadata, and that may be sensitive. So the data map allows us to organize the individual data sources. And we'll see, for example, a finance collection, which we'll talk about, that contains all the finance data. And as a result, I can lock down that finance data sources to just the finance users. And then I feel comfortable giving finance people access to this Purview so that they can just see this information. And those marketers, those rapscallions in sales, they cannot see the finance information, the finance metadata. And so again, this layer of security we baked into here. So I'm going to, that's the Purview data map. We're gonna actually jump into the tool, I think, here at this point. Let's get around to the slides.
Do you want to take a question as you transition?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, feel free to. Yeah, absolutely.
There's a chat that says, I think Purview is a service which goes and scans data when data is queried. Does it create any overhead?
Oh,
if
great
we get
question.
into that later, that's fine. But
oh no, let's address it. That's totally fine. So I'm gonna do a real quick little whiteboardy thing. That is not a whiteboard. This is a whiteboard down here. I also got the new Microsoft whiteboard. It is nice. I do have an opinion about this one. This is nice. So in general, so Azure Purview, right? There's the Azure Purview eye icon. It's the best I can do. What it will do is it will set up a scan that will periodically go out to your SQL Server and query it. And so what's going to happen is that, yes, there is a potential impact on this because what's happening is that something right now, there's 32 cores that are going to hit your SQL database. And what they're doing is they're doing essentially select star, actually, select top 100, top 128 or something like that, top 128 star. And so if you have a boatload of tables, you are going to have this engine, this Purview engine, doing select top 128 star on every single table as fast as it can, right? And so the initial scan, yes, this is it can have an impact, but granted, it's only selecting 128 or 200 rows worth of data. So it'll never query the entire data set. It'll always query just a small subset. So imagine you had 32 concurrent users hitting individual tables all at once. And then, if you have 10,000 tables, it's going to do that for as long as it can, right? As long as it takes to scan all the tables inside of your SQL Server. So yes, it can have an impact. That's the initial scan. It will be a bigger impact. And then you can have incremental scans as well. And so those incremental will look at the metadata inside the SQL Server and say, whoa, this table has not been changed, right? It has, the last modified date on the schema has not changed. So I don't care at this point. So thus, I will not scan it. So as a result, you had 10,000 tables, but only 500 of them have changed. Well, now your next scan will only pick up those 500. So you have a smaller impact on those regularly scheduled scans. Hopefully that helps for the commentary. And thank you so much, Dave, for putting that into the open here.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so let me jump back to Purview. Okay, so I have a very nice, clean demo environment provided by Microsoft to us internally. There is no playground area, unfortunately, for other users. You've got to get in there. You have to provision a service and kind of play around with it for yourself. Thankfully, it's not bad from a lowest cost perspective. It's not too bad. We can talk about pricing at the end if you all are interested. But unfortunately, if you want to play with it, you have to spin it up. There's no dev test pricing, but it's not a significant investment if you're going to do scanning of some small data sources at this point. So I just want to put that out in the air. And then secondly, so let's go into actually the Purview UI. So I, as a user, would come in here and I would just start working on something that I care about. Like, let's say I'm a marketer, right? I want to search something about maybe my customer information. And I actually don't know if this contains customer, but we're going to find out. I think it does. So say I knew, again, as a business user, I'm going to come in, search for some concept that I know about, and I want to go and explore. So great, I have this customer database. And what I'm pulling up here is, you notice how I have many different customer things, right? So for example, I have this customer Azure SQL table. I have a different Azure SQL table. I have this other individual customer. And so this might be too much. Maybe I have thousands of these, right? Because customer is a very generic term. And so I might be able to filter this down a little bit further in addition to just my general search up top here. Of course, I could have added more to my search terms. Like, I could have added sales LT if I knew what I was looking for. But really, maybe I want to break it down to saying, I really want to look at customer where I have tagged it with a concept called buyer, let's say. And so that's going to bring me down to just a single table in this case, right? But these facets allow me to filter my results even further. So it does require that we've done some pre-work, and we'll talk about that kind of pre-work that we need to get in there. But from a business user perspective, the best case is that I'm searching for something generic, but I have these other things that let me filter it down. And so we might have other information that say, hey, I want to look at a customer table that has email addresses in there, right? And this is a silly one because we already filtered it down. But okay, great. So both of these have email address, right? And I can kind of work my way through to what I want to find if I don't know the exact thing that I'm looking for. So let's click into one. Let's go and click into customer. And I'm just going to shrink that menu. And so now we're at the kind of the detail page. And again, I'm going through this as a business user because I think that's the way that most people approach it. So, and then we'll go into more technical details on how we actually get this stuff in there. So from a business perspective, I can look in here. If I wanted to, I could actually give this more information. Like I might provide a rich, detailed description. It's not automatically generated because the SQL Server just doesn't have that information built into it. But if I could come in and I can make edits to this and say, hey, look, this is what this customer is. It represents the golden record or something like that in the marketing parlance or something like that. And great, it's used in these applications, etc. I could provide all this rich description in here. Then I would have, I could look down and say, hey, look, there's some classifications here, and these classifications tend to be PII or data governance related sort of things, where it's like alert, there's something in your data that is sensitive, typically, like, for example, again, email addresses, being able to identify, again, a person's name, as I'm just listing off things that are there already. But if you are international, we cover a large swathe of what might be covered under GDPR, right? So we Microsoft had to figure out that story as well. So we built that into Azure Purview with the same exact concept that we're using inside of our own GDPR scanning techniques. We've made available inside of Azure Purview, so that you can take advantage of them too for that international scale. If you're working with the state of California, we have the same things in there, right? So we have concepts that we use for the California, I don't know, data protection CCPA or something like that. I can't remember the exact acronym, but those same things out in California. In Wisconsin, we don't really have that yet, probably, and we'll probably wait until the federal one comes around. But anyway, those kind of classifications come baked in. You can also create custom classifications as well if you wanted to. For example, a great one was like order ID. If you had a set pattern that you wanted to be able to detect that, hey, every single time that I run a scan, go look to see if there is a column that has an order ID in it. And so that way I can, quickly find where are all my order IDs, right? Where's all this information located out? And if your order ID starts with like, some letter, hyphen, some numbers, you can build like a regular expression around that. You could add column headings that says, whenever there's a column that says ORD pound symbol, that's an order number, right? And so great, you can create these kind of custom classifications and again, have them applied each and every single time that a scan occurs, right? Every single time you reach out and examine that database or that file storage system, you can have those classifications applied. So that's in principle, again, what a user might look at from the basic perspective of, I'm coming in here, I want to try to explore and find things here.
Another question from the chat, if you're interested.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
Will Purview work with Snowflake in Azure?
Great question. Yeah, so there is a Snowflake connector on the roadmap. It is not available today. We are recording this session, so I will be very careful on how I choose the words. So it is not available today, but it is on the roadmap for next year. I can tell you that much. And we can also talk about stopgaps as well. If you need to get something done now, we can talk about building a custom connector and how that how that approach would make sense. But if you can wait, it will be out next year. It's a high priority item for the Microsoft team, as well as Snowflake as our partner as well. So thank you for that question.
Thanks.
Awesome. So the other thing, just to note from a user interface perspective, there's this hierarchy concept, right, where I search for customer, and now I can actually navigate to different levels within my database, and this applies to anything that you scan. There's usually some sort of hierarchy, whether it's a data lake, whether it is a Teradata, an Oracle database, etc. There's usually some sort of hierarchy. And so we can actually click in and navigate to these other layers and start looking and poking at certain things. Like, okay, look, I can look at the properties of my Azure SQL database. Okay, I'm not a DBA, so our DBA friend who's in the audience might tell me why it's important to have something like compatibility level and other stuff inside of here. But I don't know why we'd want that, but it's useful apparently. In addition, we can explore different levels in a more visual approach, I guess, by checking out this related tab. So I can come in here and essentially I have a listing of all the tables in this particular SQL schema. And so the same thing applies to like storage account containers, to AWS S3 buckets. Like you'll have anything that you can scan has this kind of nice user interface where I can navigate and kind of browse if I don't want to search as well.
Will you be getting into the custom connector in any more detail?
Yes, absolutely. I definitely want to talk about that. That's my area of expertise. So I will definitely 100% get into there. Awesome. Okay, so real quick, the other thing I want to show in here, let me just go back a couple to the SQL database customer. So inside of here, we can also look at schema, right? So again, as a table, this is a schema that we have here, right? And so again, this was extracted, and I was able to pull out all this information that again classified at the column level. And so what this classification is doing again is either looking at the column header and the data itself, right? It's only looking at, again, maybe like the top 200 rows worth of data, and then it determined that, yes, this is an email address, this indeed contains a person's name, etc. And then also, if you happen to be using Microsoft's information protection service, then it'll also extend into Azure Purview here, right? You can apply Microsoft information protection labels into your Purview service here as well. So if you're not familiar with that, it's just another tool to define like what is sensitive, what is highly confidential information. Microsoft uses it for quite a few things, and I know several other customers like that I work with that'll have already an install base of Microsoft information protection and have created those kind of custom classification labels that will get sucked in and applied inside of Azure Purview as well. So that's enough about that. I want to see, I don't know if this one has any lineage. What I do want to show is I'm going to jump to my catalog, and I just want to show you guys really quickly an example of lineage. Well, that didn't work. Destination combo. Let's find my example here real fast. I don't know why my example is not showing up, but let's go. We're going to browse for this instead by source type. Where I'm at right now is I'm in more of the browsing mode, right? Where I'm not searching for any particular thing, but I am looking at all the asset types that I've worked with. And so again, I want to mention, we'll talk about the components of what we can or cannot scan. But at a high level, right, you can see I've got Cosmos, Data Factory, Data Lake Gen 1, Data Lake Storage Gen 2, Synapse, and storage accounts, Oracle database I scanned at one point, and like a Power BI instance as well. But really quickly, I want to, and now you can see, then I also made a bunch of custom stuff that I wanted to show you guys that I really wanted to have my destination combo working, but I don't know why that is not showing up here. Let's try one of these guys. So I'm just going to pull this up here and show you guys what lineage looks like. So a big part of this is having the ability to do, this is my non-pretty environment, so I apologize for the ugliness. Let's go over here. Okay, so we're gonna back out. I apologize. We're gonna go to this one, and we're gonna look at a Data Factory instance instead that we can do Azure Data Factory. So lineage inside of Azure Purview lets us explore how our data sets connected, and we can get some really cool graphs. This is a very basic one, but it kind of demonstrates the point that I scanned an Azure Data Factory pipeline, right? An Azure Data Factory itself, and that's like if you're not familiar with, that's an Azure ETL tool, right? It's like SSIS in the cloud, or AWS Glue if you're more familiar with AWS, and great, we have this ability to extract what those activities were inside of your ETL tool, in this case Data Factory, and demonstrate that, hey, look, this file was read in by this storage to Postgres SQL copy activity, which is just, again, moving the data around, and landed it in Postgres. So now if I were looking at data.tsv, I would see this lineage. In fact, why don't we just do that real quick? If I switch over to this asset itself, I can see, I'm here, I can see all the properties about this, I can see the schema of my file, and then when I click into lineage, I can see, hey, look, this is the source, and it's actually being used by something, and it's landing in this place. So I can even do impact analysis here as well. And if you're using things like Azure Data Factory, then out of the box, we actually have this column level lineage or column level mapping as well. So this one doesn't really have anything interesting, apparently. It's just a straight copy. But you could also have instances where, like, I have this, let's see, I think, like, let's take primary title to pick on. So maybe primary title in this copy activity or in some sort of Azure data flow, which is a Spark-based, Apache Spark-based tooling that allows you to do transformations of the data. We would be able to detect that primary title gets transformed into some other column. Maybe it's renamed, maybe it's concatenated. From this graph, we would be able to see that, hey, look, primary title is used in the construction of some other field, right? And so again, this one doesn't have a great example of this, but that's the concept, is that we have this column level lineage and mapping as well.
There might be transformations happening there. Does it give or capture any insights about the transformations?
That's a great question. Yeah, a great question. So in this example, no, because there are no transformations. But when it does, so I mentioned the data flow inside of Azure Data Factory, you will have an additional property in here that gives you the full list of all the operations. So it's not easy to parse. I'll be honest, right? It's for those, it's not an explicit that, hey, column A plus B was concatenated to create column C. You would have to hunt for that, if I'm being totally honest. You would see in the lineage graph a column A, a column B that point to a column C, let's say, and then you would have to hunt and pack and say, okay, where in that transformation did it occur, right? In the data flows, it would have a DSL property, short for a domain-specific language, which is generated by Azure Data Factory. So our connector is just sucking that out of Data Factory and dropping it there for your use. And again, we're recording. I'll try to be politically correct here. There's more work to be done in that area. But at a minimum, you can parse it. You can find it yourself inside of there. Apache Atlas, which is the underpinnings of Azure Purview, which is the actually open source project that Purview is based on. It has a technique for doing that. The only problem for doing a more fine-grained transformation logic and capturing it, the only problem is that it's performance intensive. You create, for every column, you're creating extra information, creating extra entities and extra relationships. So to track that inside of Azure Purview in the same way that Apache Atlas does it, it is for every one column that you're working with, it is a threefold increase in the number of entities you have to track. And so as a result, your costs go up and your performance goes down as you're searching across all those entities and trying to represent them in these kind of lineage graphs. So the product team is trying to find more ways of figuring out how to still represent that in a less performance intensive way than what Apache Atlas does under the hoods. So I went a little bit deep there, but hopefully that helps.
Thanks.
Thank you. Awesome. We talked about lineage. Real quickly, we can also talk about contacts. You can assign contacts for essentially as experts and owners. I can, again, everything that we've seen here so far with the classifications, the schema, the descriptions, the context, all those can be manually edited. I don't know if I have permission to do that here. Awesome, I think I do. So I could add, like Chris Fleming in here, right? And there you are. So I could add Chris here, and great. Now he's an expert, and I can give a quick little brief note about him and say, hey, talk to him about this. So great. We can save. Now Chris is out there, and if anyone wants to know about this data.tsv, go talk to Chris or Arundam here, as they both know so much about this field, or they own this thing. So if you want access, go talk to them through there. There's more on the roadmap for what will be done with the contacts, especially around the idea of owners being able to grant certain permissions through the Purview tool, right? Purview is going to become more and more of a centralized location to make decisions and take actions, and not just a place that you go to search for metadata, but it's also a decision and action taking center as well. So that was a lot on the individual kind of business user side. So I wanted to quickly jump into the data map concept itself. We talked about this briefly with the idea. Oops, where did you go? We talked about this briefly with the idea of collections I mentioned in the slide section. But ultimately, what's happening here is we have this pretty busy graph of data sources that Purview knows about and that you have set up with the intention to scan and to keep track of all that metadata. So for example, I brought up last time that it was an example of finance, right? And so I would have a thing called a finance collection. I'll just zoom in here, boop, boop, boop. A finance collection, which would allow me to organize my data in whatever way I want. I'm sorry, organize my data sources in whatever way I want. So whoops, I want to go back. If we have, again, our finance section, we have, in this case, they've broken it down by different groups, right? So accounts payable, accounts receivable, and well, this is apparently redundant, but that's okay. And in this case, the accounts payable has just this particular Azure MySQL database, right? So in theory, what I can do is I can limit the people that can find information about this MySQL database to just the accounts payable people. I can limit it based on their identity that says, or a group identity that says you have permission to access this accounts payable collection, and thus you can see information about the Azure MySQL database that this represents. Same thing goes for human resources, finance, engineering, etc. You can also inherit permissions, right? So for example, if there's a DBA perhaps that should have access to all the metadata, then you could assign it at the root, right? And say, hey, anything that gets added to Azure Purview, this group of people should have access to view the metadata. But otherwise, you can lock it down. You can lock it down based on these individual collections. So wonderful. We have this ability to organize data sources, but what data sources can we work with? That's, I think, the fun part. This is where this is just like, again, I think kind of mind-blowing. If you use Azure Data Factory, this will look familiar. There's a lot of the connectors that we're using in Azure Data Factory are also being used by Azure Purview because the technology is built. We're kind of latching on to the same information, just doing a little bit more different stuff with the data. So as mentioned, there's like 20 or 40 different connectors here. There's more that are kind of spread out here. There's also more in the works, right? So Purview it's like Disneyland or Disney World. It'll never be done, right? We will always be constantly adding and revamping and improving the tooling because there's always more data sources. There's always more things you want to do with data governance and kind of controlling what's happening there. So it'll never be finished. It will always be growing. So to highlight some of the Azure stuff here, we've got all the core data services that you could possibly think of, right? In addition, if you don't want to spend the time hooking up and registering each and every single individual Azure data lake that you have, you can also set up to be at the subscription level, right? You can say, hey, give me access. I'll give you access to everything inside this subscription, and just go scan, please, because I don't want to spend the time to set these all up manually. Same thing for Synapse as well. And just those multiples are really, really helpful in giving lots of broad swathe permission to just give me access to everything. We also have, I wanted to do, where is, some of the kind of the open source space and also competing cloud services as well. If you're using any of these open source or proprietary solutions or on-prem solutions, yeah, we're going to support it because we know that your data isn't just in Azure. We want to be able to help you get a hold of your data everywhere. File-based systems, again, AWS, of course, we are going to support them as well. And then I think this one's really cool, the Irwin connector as well. And then there's Google's Looker, and then Power BI, and then SAP. Yeah, of course, SAP's there. But these are really cool where we're getting into the part where we're helping to keep track of other tooling and other systems as well. So those are just the built-in ones, right? Each one of these you can go into, you would configure essentially by identifying what subscription it was, what service name it was, providing some sort of credentials and login information that's going to be stored inside of a key vault, a secure store for all your credential information. And that way, you have this kind of secured information set up so that scans can go on at whatever increment you want it to be. So if you wanted to scan once a week, if you want to scan every single day, it would just depend on how frequently does that data change, right? If you're working on like an application database that has a high variance, right? You're maybe growing that application rapidly and you're adding columns to it on a daily release or something like that. Yeah, maybe scan that every single day so that you know if there's any PII coming out, right? Or you have a legacy application, you wouldn't want to scan that every single day, maybe like once a month, maybe like once a quarter, right? If it's something that's like lower variance and how often it's going to change, then yeah, don't bother with changing it so much. But that's in principle what you can do from a scanning perspective with built-in connectors. And again, just real fast, there's ways of actually creating also additional scan rules. I want to see if I can maybe edit one real fast here. So what a scan rule is, it helps you identify those classifications that you want to work with. So in this case, they have created a scan rule that's going to look for everything, right? All PII, essentially anything in the government for this must be some sort of GDPR thing, because we have, a bunch of European countries, Latin American, Asia Pacific countries, etc. We have built-in rules for financial, right? We have, again, a bunch of information that comes out of the box. You can also add custom ones. I don't think they have any custom ones that are set up here, but you could, again, we talked about that order ID and stuff like that. So you could do things along those lines. Real quick, then, yep, classification rules. You can, again, create these custom ones that you want to do. That is okay.
Before you depart from sources,
please.
Kafka.
Aha. Okay. Yeah. So that is not supported yet, but is on the roadmap as well. That, I'll be honest, is probably going to get there. We'll probably support Kafka sooner than Snowflake. So if you can wait for Snowflake, you'll be pleased to know that Kafka is probably going to come sooner than Snowflake. So yeah, we have, again, lots more room to grow here. But I will talk here in just like 2 more minutes about the custom connectors that we can build out if we can't wait. So yeah, great questions. Very great questions.
Great. Now,
so,
before you get into the custom connector, because that sounds to be something that we want people to dive into,
yeah.
Jarrell asked a question that I think I'm going to make him unmute and ask, because it's about data insights.
Yeah,
so
please, Jarrell.
Data cataloging to business glossary. And I didn't catch the difference. So Jarrell, I'm encouraging you to unmute and clarify your question. Come on. No? All right. So the roadmap for data cataloging to business glossary, data insights. Maybe clarify what those two are, because we went kind of fast. I don't think I saw the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So so the data catalog is the individual entities, they're individual assets, right? So this is my data catalog. It is the known things about the metadata, just the raw metadata, right? So if I have, example, an SAP, I'm not sure how many people have worked with SAP before, but they are known for esoteric column names, right? It's like BLQ493. What is that? That's what you're going to get. When you scan, you're using the data catalog, or using the data map to register like an SAP database. That's what the data map is for, is registering a data source and then organizing it based on these collections here. So data map organizes the data sources and registers them. The data catalog is the actual assets themselves, right? So the individual SAP table, the individual SAP column, that is the metadata that's stored out here. And the adage of garbage in, garbage out is true here. SAP columns are going to look awful, and so you are going to see awful SAP column names in here. And same thing with like your data lake Gen 2, not to pick on SAP, but if your column headers are in a file, SS32, nobody knows what that is. So you're just going to get garbage in. The glossary, though, if I go back up to the glossary, oh my gosh, we have A, B, C. That's interesting. The glossary has business-related terms, and I don't know why there's so many C's near customer is a great example. We have this, again, business terms. A human has defined these. A human has determined what is a customer. And so in this case here, sweet. So we actually have, I'll try to zoom in here, the definition of a customer in this data catalog is a paid or free trial subscriber or service user. So that gives me context, right? Now I can say, I can tag an individual column, that SS32, apparently that was a customer, right? So I would go into that individual asset and tag it with the fact that that column is actually a customer. And this lets me have the benefit of, if a user is looking for SS32, I can go find it. If a user is looking for the customer in a given table, they can find it, right? Because we can actually see the glossary terms attached to a column. If they're just looking for the concept of a customer, when they do a raw search, right? If we go and we just do a search star in here, we can filter down to just give me anything that is classified. Well, apparently again with B, C, D, E, you just give me anything that's classified with customer, and I can filter for it. So that's the benefit of the glossary, in my opinion. It allows you to have a business-focused approach that allows you to, again, filter, facet, identify without wrecking it for users who only know SS32 or BLQ493, right, as the column names, because they might know it. And if you overwrite it with like literally just destroying SS32, then how will they ever find it? They'll never be able to find that column name, and the data catalog is broken at that point.
So how are these closely related? Is it that you just showed me the glossary, you searched for customer, then it will go over to the catalog that it's scanned in?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, let's go through it. So okay, so in the I did a search. I did a search for customer. I'm in this customer table. Wow, this is a bad example because we're on a customer table. In an individual asset, I will have again the metadata, but then I'll have glossary terms that are associated with it, right? This tells me that this customer is related to buyers, customer sales, and term name A, apparently. And so I can click through to here and actually understand, okay, what does it mean to be a customer? Or if I'm going back to be a little bit different, what does it mean to be a buyer, right? Oh, customer with paid subscription or service. Okay, great. Yeah, so now I'm starting to grok. What is this table all about? The scan resulted in the customer table, but a human came in and determined that this was about the buyer, the customer, sales, and term name A. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome.
So I'm encouraging Jorel to say what is it that he'd like to understand about what he's calling insights into that relationship.
Yep. Sorry, I wasn't around earlier, Paul. So my question around insights, because it was it was a gray box, right? So it wasn't quite ready yet.
Yeah.
So when I take a look at, data catalog really often defines exactly the metadata, what's going on, what's happening, how do we put that into place?
Yeah.
And then we get into the business glossary or the data glossary. I know it's ambiguous, but at the same time, when we work with our customers, we talk about, what is the business definition and how they translate that back to the back end. So that's what I was looking for to see. Is there a real sort of translation here? Is data insights going to be that translation between the actual data definition and what the business glossary, what the business definition is of that, right? So when you talk about sales, customer, things like that, that usually doesn't work its way back to a data catalog. There's kind of a semantic layer breakpoint, right? I don't want to use that much, right? I'm gonna use that super vague, but like, where is that cutoff point here? And or could you share what's the idea?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the business glossary is still human driven, right? It is still going to be a person comes in and defines what are those terms. Then the future of Azure Purview will include some sort of machine learning component that will help us to determine that, hey, I see often that customers with users who have a term like customer will tag columns with these certain patterns. Let's say that's a stretch. I don't know what it actually is going to look like, but in principle, the later versions of Purview will include this idea of let us help you automatically tag these assets, right? So that a human doesn't have to do it. Right now, that semantic layer, as for lack of a better term, is within the catalog itself, within the asset, this customer table. A human has come in and they have, if we go to like the schema tab, they don't have any clusterums. Let's just say, I'm going to do this myself. I as a user have come in and I've said, well, this customer ID, I am going to label it as a customer term, right? I'm going to manually associate this. And so that becomes now like that semantic layer. Again, if it weren't so clear as to what customer ID was related to, again, SS32, then that glossary term becomes way more valuable. This case, it's a little bit fuzzy because it already says customer, right? It's already been tagged, the higher level of customer. But this is as close we can get to like some sort of semantic layer that tells us what is this weird column really all about. If a human has come in and made that suggestion and made that addition, then that's where we get to that semantic layer. Does that help, Joel?
That helps. So let me ask, when we look at and bear with me if there's no answer, I'm good with it. But when we talk about the Power BI side and the data model behind Power BI and how this would connect to that. So again, I see the data catalog here, right?
Yep.
And we read a lot about how there's the development of the kind of the business glossary, let's put it that way, and the data model behind Power BI. Is there going to be some sort of join here? It like what is? Don't tell me too much. Don't tell me enough at the same time, right?
Will, may I interject too?
Please go for it, Nicole.
I want. Okay, because I have two questions that I've been dying to ask, and they're right along this line. So I want to ask it along with Jarrell's, and that's, can lineage go from like Azure Data Factory, Azure Analysis Services, Power BI, and the second part of that is, as a business user, I want to see the business definition, the calculation, and the lineage of this measure, for example.
Yeah.
So can you explain how Purview is there or not there to give that whole business
map for that?
Yeah, great. Okay, Gerald, does that fall in line with your question as well?
100%. Yes.
Okay. Nice. Okay, so excellent question. Yeah, I'm looking over at my other monitor here, which I wanted to quickly see if I can find the slide that shows off Power BI lineage inside of here. It's not this one. I just want to real fast check to see if my other deck that I have over here, well, that's not the right one. Where is it? This guy. I want to just real fast see if I can show you guys. Okay, yeah, here. I'm going to try. Nice. Here we go. So you should be seeing the enhanced metadata lineage and labels slide, which shows a slightly doctored up version of what Power BI lineage looks like inside of Azure Purview. So the principle here is that Purview does not currently show things like the metrics and measures down to that fine grain level. It will. The phrasing that we're using internally is called sub-artifact lineage, and that will allow us to extract things like how is this metric calculated, showing that relationship. I don't know what it's going to look like officially, but that's the intent. It is the intent to hook up that Power BI workspace and really understand all the bits and pieces that are going around here, right? And to ensure, to Nicole's point, ensure that it has that full lineage. It from the dashboard down to the report to the Power BI data set to the SQL table that it was brought up from, all the way back to the CSV files that Data Factory used to construct that table, right? So that whole lineage is possible. It's not there yet today, right? But it is, again, like the number, maybe the number 2 or number 3 ask within the community right now, and it's being actively worked on, and it will be one of the first things that come out here post general availability. It's been a very important request. So we're getting there, but we don't have it yet today. I'll be totally honest. And again, this view is not exactly what you'll see inside of Purview, but it's close, right? You'll see things like, hey, this is the report. This is the Power BI kind of connecting glue between a report and its data set. And then it'll flow out if you did something like in a Azure Data Factory or something like that. It'll flow out to that side as well. But the metrics and measures are not present today inside of Purview. Does that help, guys?
Sort of plan? Is there some sort of plan as to you can see who's engaging with this sort of lineage, whether it's a sandbox to production to anything like that? Is there going to be? Is that possible to some degree today? And if it's not, will that be part of the plan too?
Yeah. So the way I understood your question is it possible to see that Will Johnson is checking out the lineage tab for this particular, or checking out the sales fact table, and how many times has he checked it out in the past 30 days or something like that, or how many users have checked out the sales fact table in the past 30 days? Is that fair?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, not today, but also it's this auditing and traceability within Purview is on the roadmap as well. It is lower, I think, on the priority list, but it is something that is being asked of by some of our largest customers as well. And they, that's something that we want to really embed here. The only thing that I was told at some point was that that's it's technically PII, and so now it changes the model, because like if I identify that Will Johnson was doing something, what happens when Will Johnson leaves the company and he wants his data removed and stuff like that? So that's the only blocker. Technically, actually, Apache Atlas, fun fact, has that feature built in. So we have actively removed that feature from Azure Purview because of that PII concern. Because again, when we do something, we have to do it at massive scale, and we can't just assume someone's going to take care of it for you, right?
Can I ask one more question, Paul or Nicole? Okay. So when we talk about metadata, lineage, and labels and these pieces, and if this is in your presentation down the road, please just say it. What is the value of these elements? Because when we talk to a lot of organizations, we do a lot of implementations of data infrastructure and stuff like that. But when we start getting into metadata and lineage and labels, right? That's when the yawns start happening and things like that. And it's okay, right? Because they don't want to get into that part of data management, but it's a critical piece. But what are you guys seeing? How are you guys building that into this story?
Sure,
Can I ask that?
Yeah, absolutely. And like Chris, feel free to put your bit in how you approach the conversation as well. From my perspective, the Microsoft is promoting this towards right now, like people who are in charge of data governance, right? That security layer, because we're promoting to those folks as well as business users to be able to find that metadata, to be able to discover it, to move faster. So that way, like there's 50 different things called customer. Well, if I have one place to go and figure out, hey, what's all the difference between all these customer tables? Where is that customer table used? I might be able to figure out which is the canonical source, or which one should I care about. And I know, like, Power BI has like verified or certified reports or something like that. I think of it in the same way as Azure Purview, right? Having all this extra information about lineage helps to kind of certify that this table, this document, this CSV file is very important from a business perspective. From a data governance officer kind of perspective, or security officer perspective, we come at it with the impact analysis to say that, hey, if someone's going to change something here, if someone's going to change some upstream table, they're going to rename the column, let's say. Well, how does that affect everything else? And those data governance officers, or maybe even application developers, can come in and say, whoa, pump the brake. If you change it, you're going to change it for 500 different things, right? Because the lineage graph could be that complex, right? And you could see potentially that whole process. So impact analysis is one big thing that I talk to customers about, but also if I go back to Purview real fast here, but also again, for data governance officers, it's that scanning and classification of sensitive information. The real big thing, and again, I don't think this one has it in a previous demo environment we had that great example of credit card numbers and social security numbers were showing up in the data. And if I'm doing scans all along the normal time, I could see a pattern. If we go to classifications, that'll probably help. I can actually see a pattern over the last 30 days. Oh yeah, here's a bogus example, but like, oh snap, right? Okay, I can see that. All right, I'm scanning more SQL databases, and if I can see, let's see, I want to see. This one doesn't have the graph I was looking for, but I can see that, okay, apparently I'm classifying a lot of Argentinian national identifying numbers. In my other example, I saw a big spike over the last 30 days of, oh, here's credit card number, here's a big spike of social security number, something's really fishy. And then I can even go into here and I can click in. And again, as a data governance person, I can say, all right, where are these individual ages coming into play, right? Well, this is a bad example because, oh, there it was. 2 instances. Okay, and so now I can come down, I can actually navigate to the files or the tables or the data factory job that's responsible for propagating or storing that PII. Like, I just did that in a matter of seconds. And I can do that for any kind of classification that I wanted to. I can explore any and all of them to say, why do we keep leaking PII? And I can go and potentially, again, full story, is I can go into the file, I could potentially see who's the owner, and I can say, Chris Fleming, what are you doing, right? Like, why? Why do you have all this information out here about Argentinians, right? So like that's probably the story I think I say most often. I don't know, Chris, if you'd want to add to it or explain your infatuation with the Argentinian ID numbers.
I love those numbers, but Will, I think you did a great job describing it. The Purview, the audience and who you talk to about Purview kind of scales at the size of an organization. So, very large enterprise organizations, the CIO wants to know that, they have an initiative to ensure that the company is data driven, right? And well, you can't really drive data if you can't find the data. You've got, the data governance discussions. If there is a scenario where maybe a part of your organization is going to get split off into an independent organization, and maybe you're trying to get a handle of, what does that mean to your data estate? But it'll be really interesting to watch the space. We had an internal company event today, and one of the individuals that was kind of talking about Surface devices on our company call today, it was really interesting. Kind of asking us to remember when laptops came out with cameras. You're like, wow, why would you need a camera, right? And here we are, all it's like used to be, well, do we need this? And now we couldn't live without it, right? It's the most important thing that you've got on your laptop these days. So I think it's a nuanced conversation, and one that will become more and more important.
That's great, Chris. Well, that's a really good example. I love just, you take it for granted what you have now. And like the slide that I breezed over in the very beginning is just talking about how much data is out there, right? If I can get back to it, there's, so quick blurb that Microsoft is promoting in our decks is, that's the wrong one. If I go back to here, well, that's not working. 90% of corporate strategies will cite information as a critical enterprise asset by 2022. So like, again, industry experts are saying it, where there's more data coming out there, like Chris is saying, and we're taking it for granted that we have, we can keep our hands around all the data, but that's going to change. And it's going to be more important to ensure that you really know where all your data is in the future, and sensitive information as that becomes more and more important to individuals as well. Yeah. Awesome. I love all the questions. I think I'm running a little bit over on time, so I apologize for going a bit long here. I wanted to quickly talk about the custom. Please go ahead.
Understandable. You're good.
Okay, cool. I want to talk. Let me just cut over to the custom connector solution here. So a couple things to consider. So number one, when we talked about data sources, right? Again, 20 to 40, probably 40 is overestimating as we scroll through here. We could count, but we're not going to. But a bunch of different built-in connectors. However, there's probably a logo on here that you want, you don't see, or you just can't wait for it, right? Snowflake, Databricks, an insert open source tool here, right? Like there's probably a bunch. And so as a result, the coolest part, in my opinion, about Azure Purview happens to be the Apache Atlas underpinnings. So Apache Atlas, as I've alluded to a couple times, is the open source project in which Purview rests on top of. And this allows us to take advantage of their pretty well-defined API that allows us to do almost anything we want with all this information, right? And I'm being serious here with almost anything we want. Every single asset that we have looked at so far can be touched. We can come in, with an API, we can come in and we can manipulate this information. We can create our own Cosmos DB instances without even having to scan. There's reasons why you should still scan, right? Number one is because it's going to capture everything. You won't miss anything if you do a scan, but technically you could build this yourself. You could absolutely, if you knew how they all are all connected, then you could instantiate individual Cosmos DB collections and tables and columns and the lineage. You can do all of this yourself. So with that being said, my suggestion to you, if there's a data source that you cannot wait for, right? You don't see the logo here, and you've talked to your Microsoft rep and they're saying that, hey, it's not on the roadmap, or it's on the roadmap and it's like 12 months away and you really need it, then I would encourage you to consider doing a custom connector approach. And so what does that look like? I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to use the PyApache Atlas package, the one that I and several other contributors have worked on at Microsoft and beyond as well. We got some open source contributions from customers too, which has been phenomenal. And I'm going to share with you all an example for a MySQL database. I'm going to assume that you've seen MySQL in the past. And so again, MySQL is just like any other database. It's got a server, it's got schemas, it's got tables, it's got columns. So one of our peers at Microsoft, Brian Sherwin, he was kind enough to be working on this for his customers and then contributed back to the open source community. And what he's doing in this example, I'm just going to switch over to the code. Well, we want to do this one. What he has done is essentially he's wrapped up some MySQL calls, right? Just essentially interrogating the system internals database for MySQL. And he is then extracting that information, and then he is massaging it into the shape that Azure Purview or Apache Atlas expects. And so I'm just going to zoom in a smidge here. Don't think that you have to understand all this code, but I want to show you what he's kind of working through. So what he's doing is essentially going through a MySQL database, and he has written code to say, hey, let me actually go to the examples where he's doing like the SQL. Scan metadata, save entities, blah, blah. I just want to, sorry. Server instance. Yeah, okay. So this is where he's written some Python code. The program is written in Python, but nothing stops you from using your own favorite language as well. You could reinvent this to be Java, .NET, etc. But what he's doing is he's calling a function that says, hey, connect to the MySQL database. And then execute the command called show databases. And right, that's just literally extracting the information out of the MySQL database. And then he's going to iterate over each database inside of there. And so once he's done that, he is going to essentially list through each and every single database, and he is going to construct an entity. He's going to construct the Atlas entity that is necessary. And so I want to show what that might look like. So I'm going to go down here. Actually, I want to switch over to VS Code. We're going to go switch over to VS Code. And what that might look like is something like this, where he is going to create a Atlas entity, and he has to give it a name. And so this might be, MySQL DB1, let's say. And then he's got to give it a type. And so this is where I don't think, unfortunately, I have enough time for it tonight, but I'll send out a link to the deep dive video on this. But you might create a custom type, or maybe you're going to leverage an existing type. So like if I wanted to do an Azure SQL table, that's the name of the type. And so maybe I call this my Azure table, let's say. This type represents a contract. So if you're familiar with any object-oriented programming language, it essentially says, what kind of things can I keep record of? I can then, talk about attributes inside of your attributes, and I can list out things like for an Azure SQL table, I think we saw something like compatibility level, or maybe like principal ID. I'm not an expert on this, so I don't know what a principal ID really means, but I know it's some sort of some sort of string. So ABC 1, 2, 3. I can also pass in things like last modified. And again, that's going to be some sort of Unix string, right? Unix date time. So it's some number since the epoch, right? So I'm not sure what number that's going to be. That's far into the future, probably. Or if you're thinking about, let's say, an Azure SQL column. Well, this is going to be a much more practical one because we don't have principal ID or last modified. You have attributes called data-type, and that's going to be something like varchar, right? Easy. You might have an attribute such as like precision, if you're like a float or something like that. And that's a number of, I think, like 15, let's say, and etc. Right? You have attributes that you can keep track of based on the contract that is your type. And so one question is often like, well, how do I know what kind of contract that I have? You can extract that information, and there's a huge amount. We have, I don't know, hundreds, maybe thousands of entities, right? Apparently, I've been limited to 5,000 items that I can work through here. So there's probably around 5,000 entities here. So great. But if I want to look up Azure SQL column, I can quickly see that it has a set of attributes that I can keep track of. Okay, so apparently it's data underscore type. I have a length attribute, I have a precision, I have a scale, a system type ID, a user type ID, is XML document. Okay, so I have a lot of things that I can keep track of on this particular column. And again, it applies to tables, databases, servers, etc. You have these contracts, and that allows you to specify things that you want to keep track of. So that's, again, for an Azure SQL column. But there's nothing stopping you from creating a custom MySQL column, let's say, or custom, proprietary, that's not ISO proprietary, DB column, let's say. And you can create your own things. This is the power and flexibility of Apache Atlas and Azure Purview, that you get to create your own thing, and you can represent it in your own way that makes sense to you and to your business. And so that's what I love about this the most, is that, again, there's such a huge amount of flexibility. So this is the process, right? You would write some sort of code like our friend Brian Sherwin did, where he was iterating over a particular data source, in this case, MySQL. And so he knows how to query MySQL. And so great, he's done that, and he iterates over it. And he says, hey, for every single database, I'm going to create an Atlas database entity. And that's really just, he's passing in some information about the database, and then he's passing in this fully qualified name. And so since we're all data people, that's essentially like the primary key. It's a string. It represents a unique name that will be used here, right? So it has to be a unique field or a unique string, and it often follows some sort of pattern. Like if we go back to here and we do qualified name here, it'll be something like server / DB / schema / table / column, or pound symbol column, as the convention might be. And so that's literally like, what you fill in the blank, right? This would be some sort of unique string, because the table and the column name are probably unique, right? And so great, I have this unique identifier. And so that's what Brian does. And then again, because this is at the database level, he's using some sort of kind of recursive little bit of code here, where he's going to call another query, and he's going to do scan tables for that particular database, right? And then again, he knows apparently there's a command in MySQL called show tables from whatever that database name is. Awesome, great. So he's going to do that. And then repeat the process, generate that unique name for the table, add that table, kind of churn the information, churn the attributes that he's extracting from there into that Atlas entity. And then next, he's going to scan columns, right? We keep going down the rabbit hole. And so great, now that he has scanned the table, he's going to execute a command, which is in MySQL, specific to MySQL, use this particular database and show full columns from this table. And then he just parses that information, right? He says for result in results, like he's going to iterate over each row of the columns. And he said, okay, great, add an Atlas column, and then connect it to the underlying table that it was belonging to. So I think this is a beautiful example of what the process looks like. It is, I have some data source, I know how to work through that data source, or I have some sort of ETL tool that has an API. I know how to work that API to list and enumerate all of the things that are going on there. And then the process becomes, using Python or some other tool, query that information on your data source or on your ETL tool, and then massage it into something that looks like this, where you've got your name, your type, your qualified name, and then any attributes that you're keeping track of. And so I think there's a lot of resources on Azure Purview and PyApache Atlas that I can share out with the team. But if you're interested in this, again, there's some good videos out there on using the Purview REST API, the Apache Atlas REST API, and PyApache Atlas to get something like this done. And again, I will also say that we've had some great contributions from the community, where they have given us, as an example, this one is about MySQL. There's one for Amazon Redshift as well. I think I had one about an Apollo database. One customer brought up to me. I've never heard of it before, but they wanted to move it to Purview. And so there's some examples of doing this, and then there's plenty of examples on just doing basic create, read, update, and delete operations with the Atlas APIs as well. So lots of things for you guys to go through on how to start doing the more advanced side of this. And again, if you have any questions on that, I'd be happy to talk with you guys, offline, I think, or through the meetup channel. And I'd love to, help you guys see how this is possible to be done. But yeah, that's just a real short brief on on what is possible. And again, I think the metadata ingest one is a beautiful example of how to do that and just kind of iterate over that data source and massage that metadata into the appropriate type for your application for Azure Purview. So I'll end there with the hope that it was helpful and clear as mud. But I'll link to more information for you guys as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Yes, I think that was excellent. Jorel hopefully got a lot out of. He was the one most interested in kind of diving into the custom connector there. So that was good. Great questions from everyone. If now is the time to think about questions for our presenters in specific, and then we'll fold into our webcam on networking time. So any other questions about the content, about Azure Purview? Nicole, you raising your hand? Go ahead. Oh, you're muted.
Unmute. Okay. I was taking notes. Let me give me my notes up here real quick. One of them was with the auditing and so forth, and as a data governance manager, for example, or a data security person, is there going to be any type of alerting based on some of these classifications? Has that been thought about at all? I mean, because to look at these graphs and see all these usage and stuff like that, it takes time. So alerting is the thing I'd asked about.
Yeah. So there is built in right now. I don't think so. There is I'll link to this as well. There is an endpoint that you can listen to. So if you want to write custom code right now, Kafka publish motion, there it is. If you want to write some custom code right now, then you can absolutely have like an Azure function or some sort of serverless code watching for any creates or updates that contain this particular classification. I think long term, yes, they want to do some sort of alerting based on this, but I haven't seen anything come out recently. I don't know, Chris, if you've seen anything else on the Purview Champs channel, but I don't think that's one that's near to being released.
Yeah, I was just looking at this documentation about publishing messages from Purview's Atlas Kafka topics via event hubs. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. That's exactly it. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. I have 3 more questions, but I'll let somebody else go next.
Anyone have a question? If you're too shy,
I have one more question, and I appreciate everything, Will, and that's a great overview because I really want to learn more about Purview. Quick shout out to Brian Jones. Wausau's my hometown, so anything happening with Wausau Supply is important to me. But otherwise, I would like to understand if you could share in any way what the service cost will be. And if I missed it, I missed it. But if you could run through a really high level again, like how is this going to build into a client's, Azure cost infrastructure kind of cost?
Yeah, absolutely. Here, I'll share my screen one more time with the pricing page, and I'll link it as well. So it is generally available, and it is this is official pricing. There's a slight delay in this part where we haven't specified what the official pricing is going to be for scanning Power BI and SQL Server on-prem, because we want you to do it. Really, it's just, hey, please, check it out, do this, so we continue to have this free for a limited time. But in principle, the main charge is this, right? So for every minute of the day, or I guess in this case, every hour of the day, you're going to be charged 41 cents at a minimum. And that is, there's no turning it off. There's no, scaling it down manually. Minimum 41 cents per hour. And that is for essentially, you have access to the Purview UI, you have access to the REST APIs, you have access to the data map, business glossary, etc. You can call the REST APIs. I think it's like 25 million times in that month or something like that, at some crazy rate or crazy amount of calls per second. That's what you get for that 41 cents per capacity per hour. You note that there's per one capacity unit, and up top here it says every 2 gigabytes of metadata. So not real data, not like if you have a terabyte in Teradata, you're not paying for that, right? you are paying for the metadata. So if you have 15 columns and they're each 15 characters long, and well, that's too much math right there. So you got 10 columns, they're each 10 characters long. Well, that's 100 bytes worth of storage, of metadata storage, plus the wrapper and all that for the information. But like that's the gist. You're not going to store 10 terabytes of information in Purview. You're storing megabytes really for any given table at that point. And so, yeah, please go ahead.
And the metadata is stored. The identified metadata would be stored where? What's that linking to?
Yeah. So it's inside the Purview service, right? So it's in a shared storage that you don't have access to the underlying storage. It's surfaced through the Azure Purview UI or through the REST APIs at that point. And
is it by per user then? That
you can have infinite users. Yeah, you can have as many, because the data catalog, if you're familiar with Azure Data Catalog, the previous generation, that was on a per user basis. And so that's no longer the case. I can have my entire tenant accessing Azure Purview, and we're cool, right? You're just paying 41 cents for that privilege, right? To have everybody checking it out. And so I think that's great, right? You can now have the largest companies in the world checking out Azure Purview and giving everybody access to that metadata. It's only charged for, again, how much metadata you are storing, and so that's going to be a fraction of the real size of your data, your actual data estate. And then again, if you move beyond that, right, like you've gone beyond 2 gigabytes worth of metadata, then you'll bump up to the next capacity unit, and so then it'll be 2 capacity units at 82 cents per hour, right? And then you go up to another 2 gigs, and it's multiply times 41 cents times the amount of metadata you're storing. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool.
100%. Cool. Thank you.
So yeah, that's the core though. Then the other part though is when you're doing scanning, that has an additional charge associated with it. So if you are going to scan a bunch, right? Like you're scanning, we talked about a highly volatile database. If you're going to scan that database every single day, and you're going to do it once per day, then you are going to be charged 63 cents per vCore. And right now the vCore is, as far as I'm aware, is like 32. It's going to try to hammer it, right? It's going to try to do it as fast as possible. So it's going to be like 32 times 63 times however many hours it takes to do that scan. And so that can add up, right? If you're doing like a massive data lake, then you're in trouble at that point, because not in trouble. I take that back. You're not in trouble. You should be expecting a longer period of scanning and a longer period of and a larger expense, because your data lake is just so huge. It takes a long time to list. It takes a long time to read the first 20 megabytes of each file for that classification to occur. And so that's where the cost can become substantial in the initial stage, or it can become noticeable in the initial stages. Let me say that. Does that help?
Sure. Shale has a question.
Please.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I was just trying to figure out about the HIPAA compliance, and I did hear about the PHI thing, but when you were showing the examples, it was more related to the PII. So does that specifically tag, and it would be a wholesome thing? I mean, everything that is having those kind of content would be tagged using various ML maybe logic, or how is it?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So let me try to find, I don't have the classification rules right off the top of my head here. So it's primarily around GDPR, right? Like HIPAA, specifically if there's something along the lines with HIPAA, can't find it. But it's mostly around GDPR and personally identifiable information. So there's no ML currently for Azure Purview. It is based on regular expressions and a couple other like large databases that we were able to grab for like person's names, right? So if you got a Will Johnson, it'll be easy to detect a Will Johnson, right? Because it's a common US-based name. But if it is a more unique name from a different country that hasn't covered in those research databases, then it won't detect that name, right? So fingers crossed, you've got a wide variety of names that it's trying to pick up in the first 200 rows of the data. And so if you wanted to, there's two other options. Number one is you can create a custom classification rule. And so that would be let's just create something that has a regular expression or matches certain patterns, right? And so great, you could do that, or you can, using the APIs, you can manually classify things as well, right? So if you had a way to programmatically know that this is HIPAA data, I could create a custom classification that is HIPAA related, and then using a Python or Java or C# program, manually apply it at that point. But yeah, unfortunately, there's no machine learning built into Purview currently that you could do a model to determine what it should be classified. It's only regular expression based patterns at this point.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for the question.
Jorel's typing, but Nicole, you had others. Jump back in.
I'm typing as well in my notes. Can you share any details on the Power BI timeline?
I don't know, Chris, if you are aware of any difference in the Power BI timeline. I haven't heard of any like official dates or anything like that.
I have not, but this is a great time to put a plug in for Ignite. Microsoft Ignite is coming up, and I honestly have no knowledge about if there would be something announced related to this topic at Ignite, but sometimes topics are announced at Ignite. So I would ask you to, I'm going to get the link here and put it into the chat. It's a no-cost conference that's coming up in November.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep, I'm all signed up.
We have a debate going in the region and in the Power BI users group on the usage of Azure Analysis Services versus Power BI data sets and the future of those two. And we're implementing both. You talked about the reading in the Power BI eventually, but not the Azure Analysis Services. And so I'm trying to learn from you, is this another reason to lean more towards the Power BI data sets?
I think that's a fair statement. Yeah. Right now, Purview does not support Azure Analysis Services. And at least initially, there was no plans to support Azure Analysis Services. That's the product team just wants you guys to move to Power BI, and there's not as much investment in analysis services. And Chris, if you want to share anything else along those lines, I know you're a little bit deeper on that side. So that's as far as I've heard from the Purview side, at least.
Yeah. So Azure Analysis Services and Power BI Premium, Power BI really, but Power BI Premium for sure, have always been kind of like Power BI Premium trying to catch up to analysis services, right? And then kind of becoming a superset of what Power BI Premium is now really kind of a superset of what Azure Analysis Services does. That said, if you're tuned into what's going on with Power BI Premium, you know that we've recently gone to Gen 2, kind of a Gen 2 architecture for Power BI Premium, which is a whole other topic. But if you're familiar with the Gen 2 architecture and kind of familiar with how analysis services are, you can see that there's a little bit of a divergence. So I kind of expect this ping pong game of engineering and fitting into a service to make its way back to analysis services. So that's just experience and kind of reading tea leaves. I mean, Azure Analysis Services is a very important service, and heavily used. So I think that will still be challenging for everyone to kind of figure which one do I pick. But I don't see a lot of hand wringing about picking wrong. I mean, if Analysis Services does what you need, I would go with that.
I think Marv had a question. Did you, Marv?
Well, just a real broad general one in case I missed it at the beginning of the presentation. This is obviously a newer technology platform. So can you give a couple examples of corporations or organizations nationwide that have adopted it, that are like early adopters? And then the bonus question would be, how is it, in a nutshell, how is it like transformed their organization, or what's been the end result?
Yeah, who are
I
you
think it's
guys
great.
competing against or scared of?
Yeah.
I'll ask that question. Who are you scared of in this spot?
To answer Marv's question first, so the one that I know that I can tell you guys is the Heathrow Airport in the UK. So I can link to their customer story here. I actually worked with them. They actually had a really interesting journey where they were doing stuff on-prem, and then they had their own metadata database stored in Azure SQL, and using the PyApache Atlas and some other tooling, we were able to get them to migrate all of that to Azure Purview, right? So they didn't have to rescan everything, and their custom stuff was all still hooked up there. I think it's too early to say who has it helped to transform their organization, unfortunately, because there's I'm guessing, Marv, we can definitely look at some sound bites inside of here that Heathrow was polite enough to share with us. But I don't know of anyone who specifically has been like, yes, this has been a totally transformational experience to the point of, I think it might have been Jorel earlier about, people get tired of like data governance because it's not a moneymaker, right? It's even potentially not even a cost saver, right? To be doing data governance. I think it has the potential to be really transformative, but to Chris's point earlier, you've got to have a lot of data. You got to have a lot of data and have a lot of problems with that data for it to be truly transformative, I think. Does that help, Marv?
It does. While you were making the presentation earlier, I was kind of doing a search on the internet about this product, and I saw a few examples come up and how, in layman's terms, about what it can do for them. Yeah. And I kind of thought, well, it's got to be a big organization to go and use this, and so that's why I asked. But yeah, that's a good example. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And then quickly for Jorel, I think you had asked, who were you afraid of? I don't think we're afraid of anybody. I'm just going to put that out there. But we certainly have some competitors, right? Like Calibra, Informatica, Data Catalog. Those are some big names that we compete against frequently and win against frequently. But sometimes we lose. But I think those are the big ones that I've seen.
And that makes a lot of sense because, my company got started with SAP Data Services and their big catalog with Information Steward, right? And then we expanded into we know very well what's going on with Informatica as well and what they've been trying to put together. But so you made a little point there just a second ago, like that this is a big data thing, right? And I would argue that any organization that's looking to be data driven has to have this built into their program, right? So you 100%. Hear a lot of organizations that talk about, just the elemental data infrastructure. We can implement, Synapse, we can implement Snowflake, anything like that. That's great. That's not the big piece of the pie, right? That's a little tiny fraction of what's going to store your data. Purview to me is something that puts the better wrapper around the data management side of it, and that's why I want to understand, like, is Purview going to be kind of a Synapse only sort of thing, or is Purview going to become, when we talk about this hybrid cloud sort of atmosphere, what's going on, can we wrap it into what's going to work with Snowflake, what's going to work with Firebolt when they decide they want to get into Azure, stuff like that. All these up and coming kind of engines that are out there. And you got this data catalog that can interconnect with all of them based on the hyperscaler and not so much these independent platforms like Calibra and Inhalation and things like that. So I was just kind of really curious, like, what's that relationship going to look like from a near-term to long-term perspective? I get the near-term, right? Let's go Synapse first before we talk about the other ones. But I think it's great. I think it's a great product to have built into the Microsoft cloud, to the Azure cloud, for sure.
Let me take a quick step, and then Chris, I really want to hear your thoughts on this as well, on Jorel's question. From a technical perspective, I can share that we get to stand on the backbone of Apache Atlas. So Apache Atlas already has a very large ecosystem of connectors and people who are using it, right? And using it and building their own tooling around it. And a nice API that lets you do pretty much anything you want for it. So we have, from a technical perspective, that's an awesome thing. And we have partners and other people we work with, like Databricks. We are working with them to help build that connector. We're working with Snowflake to build that connector. So from a technology perspective, we can build it. It's just a matter of our customers. Are there big enough customers or enough medium to small size customers that makes it worth it for us to spend the engineering effort? But there's nothing stopping from the open source community, which is what I want to do, to building on top of it. And Chris, I don't know if you want to add anything to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just, look to Azure Data Factory and look to Power BI as two lighthouse examples of the depth and the reach of those services. We want to be able to connect to the world's data. Now, we certainly have a point of view. We'd like you to run, services on Azure, of course, but we want you to be able to connect to your data.
That's great. Yeah, that's a great example.
So what's the relationship going to be like when, and I know this might be a loaded question. I apologize. I'm just going to ask this one. So, you guys had a really close relationship, you guys being Microsoft, with Databricks. Databricks has gone about doing their own thing. They're going to be a big IPO very soon. And one of their most, recent announcements is that they've got their own data catalog product themselves.
Yeah.
So is that basically based off of what you guys have? Is it probably Atlas at the end of the day, just like you guys under the hood, or is it related? And is it going to be part of another cloud interconnect between Azure and Databricks, or anything going on in that direction? Because I'm really kind of curious where Databricks is going to try and separate themselves at some point.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I don't think Chris and I can say too much on this because it's Databricks' decisions and things like that. But I from what I've seen of the Unity catalog, it is not Apache Atlas based. It is Databricks is its own shop. Like, they build their own things all the time, right? And and it's predominantly based around the Databricks ACLs and the Databricks ecosystem. So yeah, I can see my inputs of a Kafka cluster. I can see my outputs of a Delta Lake, and I can apply ACLs to it too. I can apply, Chris Fleming has permission to, read this table, and Will Johnson does not. And so that's their whole point with the Unity catalog.
Okay.
Microsoft, we're a better together approach. We want to partner with people. We want and our companies. And so we're willing to work with them, and we're willing to jump on building the integration between Purview and Unity. And it'll be there. We're actively working with them. And then, to be honest though, we're also actively working on our own connectors for like open source Apache Spark, right? So we're going to be able to read any Spark anywhere, whether it's on Kubernetes, Databricks, HD Insight, and it might not be the same as coming out of the Unity catalog, but it'll work very well, and it'll work well for Atlas and anywhere that Spark is running as well.
That's cool. That's very cool. I mean, I get that.
Nice. Any other questions, particularly related to our content from our speaker? None? Then thank you so much for coming. I'm going to put a note into the chat. Please be sure, everyone, to thank them for coming and talking with us today. And then we're going to fold into more of our, turn on the webcams if you're sticking around to say hi. Hopefully you'll come and join us in our next in-person event so that we can even have better conversations, which I'm putting in the chat too. So if you're sticking around now, it's to turn on a webcam and say hi. Grab your favorite beverage, and we'll catch up. If you're signing out,
are you going to stop the recordings at this point, or are you going to keep going?
Yep, Nicole's stopping it now. Usually, yeah.
Gotcha,
And if you have to head